offset and fetch are two very, very useful commands that we can use. And really, it's a filtering option for the set. It's very similar to what we use with the top keyword that we talked about a little earlier in the course. Now, offset fetch is used after the order by clause, and it is actually a filtering of the order by clause, and it limits the number of rows returned, kind of like top does. But top gets the query results first and then filters them. It doesn't skip anything. It doesn't jump ahead. Offset fetch gives us not only the ability to limit the number of rows returned, but we can skip the number of rows before we start returning rows. Now, the result is this is very useful for creating like results paging type functionalities. And there's times when you'll run into this. And so let's talk about how to do this. Now, keep in mind, we're talking about development with T-SQL, and we're talking about programming and coding. And there's always about 9 different ways to skin that cat, right? Sometimes people use offset fetch. Sometimes they use other techniques. But this is a very valid one, and it's pretty cool. So to take a look at this, let's go look at the SQL Server Management Studio and look at some examples. Notice we're in a query window. We are going to execute in the context of AdventureWorks 2012. And now let's just create a very simple starting point. I'm going to select distinct values, first name, last name, from, let me put that down here so it's a little easier to read, the person schema dot person table. And this time, let's just do our order by. I'll put this one in all caps so it's a little easier for you to follow visually. And we'll go by last name, and we'll do that ascending. And then we'll go by first name, and we'll do that guy ascending, assuming it's a guy. I don't know how you tell on queries. We won't get into that. Now, there's a result set. Notice we got the first name and the last name, and we're ordering by last name and then by first name. Now, notice we got 19,516 rows. Okay, so we got a lot of rows. We did distinct, and so it took a few off. But now let's add to our order by an offset fetch. Okay, so I'm going to take off the semicolon. And by the way, all this code is going to be there, hopefully in a little bit more organized manner where you can make sense of it in your working files folder. So go check that. So I'm just going to type offset 0. We don't want to skip any rows. And we use the word rows. Then we're going to say fetch next 10 rows only. Then I'll put my semicolon, and I'll highlight this just so you can see that that's what's running. Execute that. Notice it just retrieved the first 10. Now, notice what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back and highlight just this part of the query, so we're not going to run our offset. And I want you to notice here what the 10th row is. It's Adam Adams. The 11th is Alex Adams. So I want you to notice what we can do. We can offset by 10 rows and fetch the next 10. And so we'll highlight that. Now, our first record, we should skip the first 10. The first record should be Alex, and it should run for 10 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So Blake Adams should be our last one. Alex Adams should be our first one. So let's go up here. Let's execute this command. We skipped 10. Notice Alex Adams is our first one. Blake Adams is our last one. So we skipped 10 rows, and so we basically produced, what would that be, 11 through 20? Okay, so this time we're going to say, let's skip 20 rows. All right, and let's execute this. And notice we got the next 10. So we skipped 20, we got the next 10. Now we can skip 30, which is the first 3 sets of 10. And you see the pattern here, right? We're just continuing to work our way through the result set, and we always offset by however many we've already read and fetch the next number of whatever we want. It really is that simple. Now, offset and fetch is a really cool functionality when you need it. And the thing to do with this is kind of stick it out there in your development, T-SQL development toolbox, if you will. And when you get in a situation where you need to represent only a few rows at a time, work this out programmatically. But do keep in mind that I could right here load variables, and we're going to talk about variables later, but I could have just as easy created a variable called offset, and then I could have created a variable called at fetch, and then I could have loaded my offset numbers and my next numbers programmatically, and I could put some for loops up there or whatever I want to do to load these variables to determine, and I could put all this in the midst of a loop and add 10 to offset every time so that I keep looping through my rows. So there's a lot of ways to use this. I'm just kind of give you a little creative kickstart there. But we'll talk about variables a little bit later on in the course. But this is a really, really cool functionality. Offset and fetch. It works with order by. Probably not a bad idea to go out there and read about it in documentation if you've never seen it, but play with this and look at the power. And again, there's an example out there in Working Files folder, and I flesh it out in a little bit more of a linear pattern. Do just what I did here, but it's a little more linear. So anyway, that's a look at offset and fetch.